Hjärtligt välkomna. Vi är glada att ni alla är här. We're so happy you're all here. This is the first public event connected to the exhibition Sculpture After Sculpture. It's about 3 artists, Katarina Fritsch, Jeff Koons, and Charlie Ray, who's right here. The curator of the exhibition is Jack Pankowski, who will give us a little introduction. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jack, as Daniel just said, curator of Sculpture After Sculpture, and I'm really just here to thank Charlie for agreeing to talk with us tonight. He's, along with Katarina Fritsch and Jeff Koons, I think one of the greatest sculptors working today, and all week we've been talking a bit about their similarities, the sort of deep affinities that connect their work, but there are also significant differences, and I suppose that might come out a little bit tonight when I think, well, I'm not sure exactly what Charlie has planned for tonight, but when he talks about his own work in a little bit more depth. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
Thank you for coming to the art talk, and I want to thank Daniel and the museum and the whole staff for having us here and putting on the exhibition, which is a real honor to be in, and it's made it seem effortless. But there's really a lot of work that the museum did and Jack did that we thankfully don't see. So I wanted to start my art talk tonight with a slide of Julia Childs in honor of Daniel's wife, Charlotte, his wife and life partner, who's very interested in food and its relationship to culture. Julia Childs in America, in my generation, our mothers, she's the one who kind of made it okay to really try something at a dinner party that, you know, maybe you never would have before in the 60s and into the 70s a bit. And last year, the year before, we celebrated the centennial of her birth. She's dead, but, you know, I don't know if you do that here. We do it in America when even a dead person's 100. They have a lot of radio shows and stuff like that. And, you know, so people, you know, there was a week around that time where a lot of people were on the radio talking about her and memories of her. And someone who interviewed her was talking, and I don't know if it was her voice or not, but she said something that really caught my attention. They said, "What do you do when, you know, these people were, you know, making things for their dinner parties, French food that they had never made before?" And she was very eccentric and drunk half the time. And she said, "Well, what do you do?" Someone asked her, "when you make a mistake." And I think this is really important for art. In a way, she said, you go with it. You don't stop. You don't, you know, throw it out or freak out. You just move with your mistake. You take your mistake and keep working and go right to the oven with it and work around it. And I thought that's something that a lot of people don't understand about art, how an artist forms a relationship with their mistakes and moves. It's like a mutation, a mistake, and it helps you develop and move forward. I was once debating with the artist Robert Gober, you know, sort of a question about the American painter Edward Hopper, and you know, I really like his work, but wasn't quite sure if he was a great artist or a good artist, or, you know, I was going back and forth on it. And Bob Gober said, "Well, look, Charlie, look at where he makes a mistake and how he works around the mistake and what he does with it, and, you know, how the paint strokes and how it gets incorporated into the work. And from there, you'll see he really is a great artist." And I thought that was a really, you know, really a deep comment, and it stuck with me. And, you know, later in that week, someone else got on the radio who had been an apprentice of Julia Childs. And they were talking about this experience that they had when they went to the National Gallery, or National Museum, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And they turned a corner and walked into this room, which was her kitchen, totally taken out of her place and put enshrined in the Smithsonian. And he said, when I walked in there, I felt, you know, the kitchen that I had spent all this time working in as her apprentice, I felt really old, you know, to see it in a museum. I thought it was a really interesting comment because when you look at art, you never feel old. You know, and so I thought, well, you know, maybe that is some kind of difference between art and design in a way. And with that, I was going to begin with some older art that really has affected my work and maybe more importantly, my life through my work. And this is, I apologize to people who have heard me speak before because I've spoken a lot about this sculpture. It's the, in the Metropolitan in New York. It's the Manhattan Kuros, it's called. And obviously it's very old. It's arguably the first sculpture that's dealing in some sense with space. You know, it's taking a step forward. It's not like the Egyptian work, you know, solid and rooted. It's going someplace. I find it an extraordinary, beautiful period of art because it's our childhood. And it's the dawning of our consciousness of Western culture. And I can project into this sculpture, I can project feelings of myself into it that, you know, another 75 years, 100 years, when we enter the classical, it's so perfect and the relationships become so musical and mathematical that, you know, I can't project into classical sculpture. And what are some of the things that allow me to project, I think, are the surface and the sort of struggle to make this sculpture realistic. It has a beautiful relationship, sculptural relationship of parts. If you think of the surface almost as a manifold for events to occur on, you know, that's how I think of it. And it's very interesting what's stylized and what's natural. The genitals are extremely natural. Some aspects of the feet and toes are natural. The hair looks like a 9-year-old girl made it out of bubble gum, totally stylized. The band of hair, the way it falls onto the back. So, and what's important about that? Why is he smiling? He's smiling to animate him, to give him a sense of internal being. There's a beautiful aspect of this that I only noticed recently, you know, because it's a block of stone and it feels very blocky. You know, you can really still sense the block. And you see this spot here, they had to not separate the arms from the block, or the arms would fall off, maybe if they got bent or, you know, hit by a sword or something. And what the sculptor or sculptors did, if you're in Manhattan and you look close, you see the block, and the block, the solidness continues around to the inside of the hand. And instead of that stone here just being flat, there's a slight bulge to it, like almost as if he's holding a water balloon. Just very, very subtle and very slightly. But it animates the sculpture. It gives the sculpture an intentionality that it's real. He's alive. And a beautiful experience I always have with it and always learn from it is, why do I project myself into it? Because aspects of me are stylized. And, you know, I have to stand in front of you, it's, you know, smart 150, 300, 200 people. I have to act like I know what I'm talking about. I have to, you know, hold myself properly and stylize myself. There's other aspects of me that are totally natural that I could never hide from anybody. You know, my hair is messy or whatever, or, you know, some aspect of my gestures, or, you know, that is the, you know, Charlie or whatever, you know. And so we are this kind of mix of stylization and naturalization, you know, naturalization. And I find that really fascinating about how I can enter the sculpture. really beautiful thing to remember, too, if you understand, which maybe I'll talk about a little bit later, how a work is made. You understand more about it. These were made and you remember, too, the scholar, the classicist Richard Neer told me, remember that these sculptures, we don't know why they were made, what they were about. They were votive, they were like posts. But one thing we do know, they were the only smooth objects in an extremely rough world. And that's a beautiful way to look at them, I think. You know, they bedazzled you when you came across them. You know, people were walking down rutty roads and living in mud huts, and they had leaking boils on their face. And, you know, they came across a votive kuros. You know, maybe they were trajectories of power. Maybe you saw one at a temple in Athens that a rich guy donated. And then 100 miles from Athens, you see one at a field celebrating or votive to something of the same style. You realize that guy maybe owns this field. You know, so, but we don't know. But they're so beautifully sculpted that they, in a certain sense, turn on, through their artfulness, a meaning machine. You can, there's, you know, why are they contemporary? To me, they're extremely contemporary. And why? Richard Neer would tell you they're contemporary because we can still see them. You know, they're still here, and we can still read them. And, you know, many things from the archaic we can't see anymore. You know, it would just look like an old broken rock to us or something, or, you know, some strange artifact that had no meaning. But, I don't know, I find it an extraordinarily beautiful object. And I mentioned the genitals before. And if you go and see the life of the inflation of that testicle, the form of the penis, the relationship to the legs, I mean, that ball, that testicle is going to seed the world. It's full of spermosa. You know, it's ready to go out and form the classical, form the, you know, Western civilization. And it's an extremely pneuma. It's the breath of God. It's extremely poignant and you know, really quite you know, the meaning is not applied to it. The meaning is coming from the sculpting, is what I'm trying to say, from the vocabulary of the sculptor or sculptress. And, you know, I thought that to start the inflation, the positive celebration of the Jeff's piece, Balloon Dog, upstairs, again, this relationship, we like to separate, you know, what's contemporary, what's ancient, what's old-fashioned, what's new. But, you know, there's also in Balloon Dog, like the kuros, like those swelling testicles of positive life. There is a, and as the Greeks, one thing we know that they wanted to do, they wanted their work to bedazzle you know, to just poof. And Jeff's piece is very bedazzling. It's very inflated. It's very, you know, if it pops, you know, just thousands and millions of birthdays are going to flood out into the world. And it's very sophisticated and beautifully sculpted that way. And as we can go to the Met and look at the look at the kuros figures still, and they've lost their paint. Very quickly, meaning has washed away from them. You know, we don't know if they were votive, how people, what they did in front of them, what they were celebrating. But they're still sculptural. And I think there's aspects of, for instance, Balloon Dog that, you know, after the Islamic State takes a sledgehammer to it and it ends up in a junk heap and, you know, 1,000 years from now someone finds it again and brings it up and there's dents in it, it's still going to be sculptural. People are going to still wonder about it and come and feel its inflation. And I think that's a very sculptural meaning and you know, explosion. And I wanted to talked about this pneuma, this inflation and form. There's a beautiful interview with Giacometti where and I kind of agreed when I read it with the interviewer. He said, you know, your work is so existential. It's on all the covers of Sartre books and looks like Hiroshima Man. He's burnt to a crisp. And, you know, it's like after the nuclear war where, you know, everything is... And Giacometti said, no, 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 I'm trying to make a figure as realistically as possible. And the interviewer said, what are you talking about? You know, they got these huge feet, they're bound, they're little sticks. And he said, well, when I look at you, I see your eyes, I see your nose, I see your toes, your breast, your fingernails. To see you, I have to scan you. And it's not until I back up across the room and all the way out into the hallway that I see all of you. And then I not only see all of you, but I see this huge vista of space coming in around you and compressing you and squeezing you. So Giacometti, to him, this realistic figure is also the embedment of the space around the figure. The space is, in a sense, you know, the hand squeezing the clay on the armature, making the figure of Giacometti. And that space is very amoral. It's very beautiful in the fact that it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't care that you're here, it doesn't know that you're here, yet you are here. It is just there. It's world space, kind of an amoral, real space, and it's fundamentally extremely mysterious and ununderstandable, and in a certain sense, it's the sculptor's primary medium, this space. And this is Katerina's piece of Ghost and a Pool of Blood. I find it extremely compelling and interesting sculpture. I know it's two pieces, and it's interesting to look at it together as one piece. And I think back to what I was doing when Katerina made this and what other sculptors were doing in terms of our surface. I was making steel tables, and things were more post-minimal and kind of heavy and very materialistic. And I think this was a kind of beacon to the future in a way, where a lot of artists later followed and have these kind of industrial pop surfaces as reflected in the blood. And I think that is how she saw that as very, very interesting. I like thinking about this piece a lot philosophically, and ghosts are very interesting, I think, to think about. And where is the ghost here? And excuse me both to Katerina and Jeff if my interpretations are just my interpretations. I'm not trying to approach them scholarly or anything. But it's what I personally move around and think about. You know, normally the blood is physical and it's messy and it's what you clean up in the hospital. And it's us. It's the sea that we walk around with evolutionarily, salty. You know, it's full of disease, and it contaminates us, and we want to stay away from it. It's very physical, and the ghost is very ephemeral and comes and goes at will and blows through on the wind. And I ask you, is that a ghost or is that Katerina's assistant under a sheet? And the ghost is the blood. And there's a beautiful, if you spend time ever at the opportunity to really spend time with Rodin or with a Rodin pattern, very often his drapery is incredibly interesting in that how it leads into the form of the figure. There's these deep crevices and passages that move in and around and through. And this ghost is very physical, and it's even, I sense the figure in it. It's even bent at the shoulder. And its relationship to the floor, how it's cut, then the relationship to the pool of blood, I find extremely sculptural and extremely interesting. And so to me, there's a weird philosophical shift that goes on about ghosts and life, and I find it really compelling and philosophically, really beautiful piece. Rodin, this thing that I mentioned about is it a ghost or the assistant? When Rodin made Balzac, he's rearing back, and the critic said, that is just ridiculous. There could be no figure under that drapery. It's just such a monstrosity. And the sculpture that influenced everybody, and Sarah on, and he's just the gravity and the weight. And Rodin brought people into his studio after the bronze was unveiled and just took an axe and cut open the drapery and peeled it away, and there was Balzac, yeah, with the belly and everything, but perfectly correct. And I think in a beautiful, quiet way, you can, from looking at this sculpture, also enter Rodin in a new way, in a very beautiful way. And I talked a little bit about space being the sculptor's primary medium, really, and the mysteriousness of it. And this piece is also at the Met, and it's a girl, it's her gravestone, Steely, and she's kissing a bird. And it's a relief, and flat, illusionary pictorial relief. But the only place where space opens up, where it isn't in relief, is this passage between the lip of the girl and the bird. And I find it just extraordinarily rich and philosophical. And again, the philosophy is not pre-sculpture. The philosophy comes out of the sculpture. It's embedded in the sculpture. But, you know, the idea, as I was talking before, about pneuma and the balloon dog and the testicles and, it's here, the space is bird song, it's breath, and it's life. And it can only be there so beautifully flowing around that beak and mouth, and it's so real and fundamental, almost like particle, like a physicist could enter that space and ponder it, as well as a philosopher. What is it? And it only can be there through its sculptural orchestration. It's because the relief is flat that space gets such a mysterious charge, I think. And this is the first sculpture of mine that I'll talk about. But when I was first got married to my wife, who's in the audience, Silvia Gasparo Moro, who's Italian, she knows a lot of very interesting Italian designers and philosophers and people. And the the designer Roberto Bucco gave us for our wedding present this beautiful colander. It's almost magical to put the pasta in, the water drains out of it, and we use it all the time. And it was in this kitchen drawer. And another friend of hers came, Carlo Intero, a philosopher of quite interesting Italian philosopher, Intero, and he was getting coffee and on his own in the kitchen, and he opened this drawer by mistake, and he came out furious, and he said, "What is that piece of metal doing around those beautiful holes in your kitchen drawer?" And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And this is a piece that I was in quite old, and in a show I did at the Whitney many years ago, retrospective, I think around 98 or so, and it's topologically complete in that an ant could walk on the top, up into that bowl, and down around and be underneath. So, and the objects are fused to the tabletop. So the one thing I wanted to talk about, when I did that show, I had a feeling, you have a big show and you start thinking about everything you've done. I said, well, all this work I can kind of put in my pocket, and viewers can too. They say, oh, this guy made this big box, he filled it with ink, he's got this sculpture of an orgy, but they're all him, it's weird. And you could speak about it. And I felt this was the only sculpture that I had made to that date where you couldn't talk about it. That somehow it was just embedded in the world. Space, like that girl kissing the bird song, it flows, kind of collapses and flows in and around and through it. And you can't remove it. It's very hard as a sculptor. How do you get something in a room? I cheat a little bit here because the table's already in a room, in a sense. It has a kind of authority, that allows it to be in here. But I think it got embedded really. I think it had a lot of confidence. And the kind of kitschy cotton jar, Q-tip jar, boom, kind of puts a counterpoint. It puts a stop on the flow of space that I think accentuates it. more somehow. And this is another version of the sculpture upstairs. It was titled Fall 91, but everybody calls it the Big Lady, which is okay. But I think of it also as the small viewer rather than the big lady. You could think of it that way. And it's important to remember it's not a sculpture of a lady, it's a sculpture of a mannequin. And when I was making some table pieces and other pieces, I was in a lot of American shopping centers and shopping malls looking at still life objects. And I started seeing mannequins and thinking about them. And I was never interested in mannequins in the uncanniness of a mannequin, you know, of like the Twilight Zone aspect where the mannequins get together at night and, you know, go out to the disco and then, you know, have to get back before the night guards, you know, get spooked or something. But so I knew I didn't want to screw around also with their conventions so much. And this spatial embedment was very important to me. Originally, it was shown alone in a very large room. So her proportions are 100% correct. So one of two things happened. As you entered the room and walked towards her, either you shrank or she grew. You know? So it was, the imagistic aspect of it is a foil in a sense. You know? So she's about shrinking and contracting yourself in the space. The space is hallucinogenic, and that's my interest. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. That's what I was trying to get the space around her to be hallucinogenic, to be fluid, to be like, you know, almost magical in a sense. And to make her, while I was making her and interacting with the mannequin industry, I learned some really interesting things. In the 50s, when we went from paper mache to fiberglass mannequins, a book was written called The Sears Standard from Sears Roebuck, where all of the proportions are placed, you know, and they're still used by the industry as a run line, kind of what a mannequin's proportions are, what the various sizes are. Interesting things, that a mannequin's eyes are painted out, because a mannequin can never have eye contact with you. Because if it does, you can't project into it. In a different way than the Kuros, you are to project yourself into the mannequin to imagine yourself wearing the clothes that she is wearing. A mannequin can never smile because then she has her own soul, or his own soul, and again can't be projected into, though a child mannequin can be smiling because the child doesn't buy the clothes, the parents project into the whole device their child. As a sculpture, to work is very difficult because it has to be 100. Again, it's not a sculpture of a lady, it's a sculpture of a mannequin, and a mannequin is always crispy and perfect. And so as soon as the hair gets undone or the clothes get spotted or old, it becomes a kind of Barbie doll image. It can very quickly become like quote-unquote contemporary art rather than a mannequin. It has an imagistic meaning then of a big lady, a big crazy lady or something. And it's something that is very difficult to keep all of that happening. When I dressed her, I wanted her wearing like Ann Taylor, like she was a lady who would go to the mall to buy clothes for, you know, work at the gas company or something. And Ann Taylor at that time cost about $600 or $700. And when I bought an Ann Taylor and scaled it up, it looked like a clown outfit. So I bought a much, much more expensive dress and scaled that up. And then it came down to look like a $600 dress. Everything is scaled up 30%, even the shoes and the stick for the mannequin, except the glass plate, because it elevated her too much, like onto a plinth when that got scaled up. So I kept that the normal size. Very important to me that these works are in our space. And they become very vulnerable that way, but they're embedded here with us. With the big lady and some other work, I think I questioned a lot of things. But one thing I didn't question is my dad. and what he gave me. And by that I mean culturally. And so the big lady in this work, in a certain sense, which is called family romance, rides into the room on a Freudian surfboard. You know, she's the big mom or the big girlfriend or the big devil or whatever. Nothing wrong with that, with those relationships, those relational, cultural aspects. But as a sculptor, you know, I'm trying to find a way to put more and more in the very sculpting, because these meanings are going to be the first things that time washes away. And then, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, this really silly question: what's the art part? Where's the art? Is it in the content, or is it in the fingernail? Is it in how it's going to look when we forget about mannequins? And you know, the answer for me, maybe not for everybody, it's in the form. By that I mean in the art, in the color, in the material, in the artistic relationships. And that's, you know, where usually for me the content is the easiest part. I think it up in the bathtub, or, you know, while I'm walking in the morning or something. But then birthing it, making it art, bringing it into the world is where the real interest is, I think. But this was made during that one election cycle where Bush and people were talking about family values all the time. Family values. And I knew that, you know, from growing up, how I grew up, that, you know, the relationship is very dynamic. It's not top down, you know. And so I scaled the children up and brought the parents down. I think the meaning of this particular work is in the hands, how they clasp each other, and these various shifting scales are joined together there. This was a sculpture I made for the Whitney Biennial, I forget what year. And it was I was, again, embedment. When I talk about spatial embedment, you know, space isn't abstract, but there's people in it too, unfortunately, and cities and cars and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And public sculpture, you know, is often read, right? And it's often just put down someplace. I was thinking, how do you bring it into the world? How do you embed it, a big sculpture? And I like the approach of a fire truck. And I looked at them in the city, and you can walk right by them, and, you know, they're ubiquitous, and you kind of ignore them and don't even think about them. And so the equation of this sculpture goes two ways. It's made just like the toy, but at life size. So what's plastic in the toy is plastic in the sculpture, and vice, you know, the metal is metal and rubber. But it's a toy becoming a real truck, or a real truck becoming a toy. And I think the problem is every idea and every thought and every sculpture and everything that we do has an artifice and an armature. And the problem is it had to be guarded. And I think it would have been much more powerful if we would have let it go, like a kid's toy in a sandbox that gets left out in the rain and gets beat up and stepped on, the dog, you know, shoes on it, and rocks get thrown at it, people, you know, and pretty soon it starts to disintegrate. I think we should have left it and just let the city take it away and let it, you know, disintegrate that way. By the city, I mean the people. Let it get graffitied and whatnot. But I only paid for half of it, and my backers at the time weren't happy at all with that idea. And it was made specifically for this location. And then it had to move because these things, again, you know, weren't apparent. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but these things I'm talking about aren't always apparent while you're working. They're things that dawn on you later and that you're juggling and thinking about. But, you know, when you see it in other places, it's not the same. It's not embedded in the same way. This work came from a thought experiment. I don't believe in ghosts myself, but if you took ghosts out of the equation and disprove their existence or prove their existence, a beautiful thought experiment would evaporate, because they're really about how we're here and who we are and what we are and how we think and, you know, our our embedment in the world. And I had this thought that if there was a fatal accident or a murder in a house even, or some traumatic experience that created a ghost, would a ghost be interested in the location or the geometry? Could it follow the topology? Or did it need the specific atoms to haunt, the particular substance or place? If you copied it completely in topology, would it follow? And so I spent a long time thinking about that and looking for a car that I thought had a ghost in it. And I would go to junkyards, and the problem there is that the cars change really quick, the topology, because they pile other things, take doors off, even when they're being cleared from the accident scene. They're bent in different ways. And so I went to insurance yards where they did investigate, where cars were still under investigation, accidents. And interestingly, I found out that ER doctors, specialists, can tell you when they look at a dead person from a car accident or a very injured person what kind of car it was, what model and what year it was, by the types of injuries that the driver or person sustained. And the insurance investigator can tell you the exact injuries of the person, even though the person is no longer there, by looking at the car. So I thought that was an interesting connection. So I found a car that I thought had a presence in it, and also a Platonic car. I saw a lot of cars that I thought had presence in it, but a presence to it, but they didn't seem like, sculptural enough, or car wrecks that I was interested in. So I finally, after a very long time, found this car and towed it back to my house. And in my driveway, I kind of converted my garage to a workspace and started taking molds one by one. And to do that, when you take a mold sculpturally, you get all these undercuts. So you can't just put silicone or plaster on a form like this, because it will flow in here and you won't get the mold off. So you have to fill with clay. And then, so the silicone or plaster doesn't go back there. You fill all that with clay. And I had a lot of, or not a lot, but a few assistants. We did that all day. And then you take a mold and then you move it. And then eventually when the part came back as fiberglass, you would take a Dremel little grinding tool and grind that out. Open up where those fill-in areas were. But I spent a lot of time sitting on the driveway, filling things with clay, and he would take a part off and then go back further and further into the structure. And, like the fat man in the circus who eats a whole car, because he eats it slowly, like one screw at a time. This car was thrown out. Every time I got a part molded, we'd cut it in half, put it in my garbage can. Until eventually, with time, all I had was an engine block in my driveway. And the real car was gone, and this car was here. And I started to reassemble it. And I had a device that I had made when I had the real car there that pieces would go back together. But I realized reassembling it that it didn't fit, because 100%, because fiberglass is thicker than tin. So parts weren't quite going together the same. It was bigger a little bit. And as I said about this mold making, and there was a moment where something happened, a mistake, where the piece shifted. I was working in the very back at the taillight, and it was the day came where I was going to grind out the clay that I put into the broken glass of the red tail light, and then put the bulb in and build all the way back, and it was going to be this beautiful space I was projecting that I would be able, realistic, be able to go in. And this was all because of my idea. And I did all that, and my heart dropped. I was looking at it, and it just didn't work. I couldn't figure out what is wrong. This is just, not alive. It's not working. And at that moment, the whole sculpture shifted from this thought experiment about the topology of a ghost and destruction to this aspect of perfection. All of a sudden it shifted from death to about perfection, to life. And I kind of think, there's nothing of Detroit in it. This object began after the car died. And like I was saying, there's an aspect I'll come back to later with the windows, because I was trying to make it initially duplicated. And how would you do the windows? Everything else is, you cut plexiglass, So these were sculptural problems I didn't understand. And eventually I left the windows out because I couldn't figure it out. And it brought this kind of beautiful Mobius strip to it. There is no difference between the interior and the exterior. Just as a four-dimensional object, a four-dimensional being looking at you would see your inside and your outside simultaneously. Just as you, as a three-dimensional object, looking at a square drawn on a two-dimensional world, you see the inside and the outside of the square simultaneously. And so the inside is the outside. And then this aspect of trying to put it together and it not fitting. What do they do, for instance, in cinema, when you have these flowing scenes that are supposed to seamlessly move or bang into each other in meaningful ways? So you got a kissing scene and a shooting scene, that just doesn't go together. So the director fades to black and then brings it back up. So there's passages in the car where they just, because of the shape and the size shifts, I just used Bondo and shifted into form. So it really became about involvement with form. And yes, I know that there is a counterpoint, which is the narrative, that it's kind of banging around with temporally. And this is another work called log or hinoki. Sometimes I call it hinoki, which is Japanese for cypress, a type of cypress in Japan, and other times I call it log. And I had an experience. I was going up to I'm from Southern California, and I was going up to Northern California, and I came across off a road this fallen oak that bugs had eaten out the trunk. And it looked like it had been on the ground for maybe 30 years. Maybe it had another 3 or 4 before it would just collapse. And I thought about it, and I would stop. That year I was going up north a lot, and every time I drove up there, I would get out and look at this thing and think about how would one make a sculpture out of this log. What would you do? How would you approach it? What would its armature even be? And at a certain point, I thought, well, its armature could be pneuma. It's these years of pressure squeezing it, trying to collapse it. In my mind, I would make a big inflatable of it. And, air pressure would, poof, counteract that collapse. And then I realized I investigated that, but too much tailoring and too much work. I still didn't know. And then I just wanted to take some molds of it, and the people said, no, you can't. There was a winery, and they said no. Then I had the governor call, and they said no. Then I had a bunch of museum directors call, and they still said no, and no, no, no. And then I just went up there with some friends and chainsaws and took it, and it took about 2 weeks, and then it was in my studio, and all in hundreds of pieces, because it would break apart, and and I slowly I realized one day that the looking at it and the construction and the reconstruction of it could be its breath or its pneuma, and I reconstructed a fiberglass version of it, one by one of these parts in my studio. I just made fiberglass molds and fiberglass parts, and then I had a studio full of these fiberglass parts that then were a big jigsaw puzzle, and for various ways put that back together, then cut it into these big barrels and that could be reassembled, and sent it to Japan. I'm making a long story short, and a group of carvers in Japan, a master carver and all of his apprentices, carved it in hinoki for me, and both the inside and the outside. I find the space inside a kind of theological space, the trajectory that God sees. The bases are like our space that we live in, chair space, what architects call the space, public space, private space, etc., etc. So there's these different spaces occurring in it. Many people worked on it, and there is a kind of these levels to it where when you walk in a room, it's very pictorial. It's this log, like it was embedded in the meadow that I found. And as you approach it, it becomes very kinesthetic. You see the pressures and the bends and the cracks in it. And then as you get even closer, it becomes monumental in that you see the intentionality of various workers. You see lazy people. You see a Friday evening where someone's just going like this. You know. There's some examples of the variations of the surface. It became a way of life for me making this, and I didn't know how to stop it in a way. I actually saw like one guy become a man. He came as an apprentice, and he was young, and you couldn't tell if he was a boy or a girl. And then he all of a sudden one year had a beard, you know, and I saw him kind of grow up. And it was a very long process, and trying to get it right, and trying to get it where I wanted it, and get it embedded in the world the way I wanted it to be embedded, but I didn't, you know, wasn't, in a certain sense it had nothing to do with me after a certain period of time. And I couldn't finish it. And I asked Yubaku what would happen to the wood. He said, well, it's going to be fine for 400 years. And then for 300 years, it's just going to crack and split and go crazy. And then it's going to have a slow decline for another 400 years. Then it'll be around 200 years after that and just disintegrate. And then I realized it was done, that it like the original tree, it had another trajectory, another life of its own. And this sculpture is upstairs. And it was kind of concurrent. I was trying to sculpt originally a jungle gym, which I saw as our first civic space that we play on. And I kept running into, in America, jungle gyms look like cubes, kind of grids. And at least when I was little, they did. Now they look like geodesic domes, but and plastic things. But I kept running into genre problems, and I couldn't slow it down. It would look like something, like a silhouette or something, you know. And I was trying all kinds of things to enter it. And then I remember that I played on a tractor as a kind of plaything, a real tractor, when I was a boy. And I found, a friend told me about this tractor in the San Fernando Valley, a kind of decrepit now suburban experiment north of Los Angeles. It is Los Angeles that has grown decrepit, but this tractor went into a backyard in 1961 to remove a stump, and it blew a rod, and there it sat for many years till I bought it. And people tried to cut it apart, kids played on it, and I brought it back to my studio, took it apart inside and outside into all its components, and had all my assistants, and hired people, 10, 12 people, to look at the parts and make them in clay. And there were like lazy people, you know, poetic people, very anal, tight people, loose people. And I was very worried that this is going to be very schizophrenic, all these different hands on it. And so I started assigning people different things. And this is the tip of the iceberg, because there's more parts that you don't see inside. So there's these almost like private spaces and sculptures internal to it. And I really like it. And I think when you look at it, you first might think it's an old tractor that's been sandblasted and polished up. Then you might think it's like the car has been molded and you know, recast by molds. And then I think with time, temporally, its embedment, you slowly realize that it was made by hand. And then even slower, you realize by different hands. And I think that has meaning. And I would like to rename it. I said this in a catalog in a show that I recently had, philosophical object. I think of it as like a philosopher's stone in a way, and you can temporarily, quietly look at it. And I see it as a tractor in heaven. I'm speeding up a little bit because of the time situation, but I hope you don't mind. This is upstairs too. It's titled The New Beetle. And I believe that if a sculpture can move you physically, it can move you mentally. I'm very interested in how long you stand in front of a sculpture, where you find your body in front of a sculpture, you know. A ship in a bottle is not a sculpture, it's a painting. And the reason is because you never need to go around the back of it. Everything is in the front. You know, but a sculpture, you need to walk around, you need to see it at different distances, you need to come back tomorrow, you need to see it. And this sculpture, you find yourself on the ground, down at the boy on the floor, I think is just abstractly very interesting, for me anyway. Like the car upstairs, or like the unpainted sculpture, the smashed car. Originally, this was a polychrome sculpture. I was thinking of the boy as a ghost, or a lost child, and the car was in the world, and was hyper-realistic and painted. It was painted with colors, black and red. It had a whole interior as well. And I was looking at it with the color in the interior. It was interesting because it wasn't internal in the child anymore. There was no space, no reality of the child, because you instantly went into the windows. And something similar in an opposite way was resolved with the car, the big fiberglass wrap. And I didn't know how to resolve it. And then eventually I resolved it, I think. What happened when the windows were there, this space wasn't in and around and through him. It's just gone, because you instantly, without peering into it, you knew that there was a steering wheel because of the type of car. You knew how to get in, and where you went in was to the toy. So the toy kind of, the interior of the car ran away with the sculpture. And it took me a long time to figure out that I could do what I was trying to do without color, but just changing the genre. So this is sculpted the car in a kind of, maybe it's not apparent like that, but a hyper-realism. Very super realistic. And areas of him are less realistic. Some are, you know, I use the figure as a kind of manifold. And often there's almost the figure like the floor of a high modernist sculpture, you know. There's different genres and different manners of realism and levels of articulation in different areas of my figures. And I saw an aspect today that I had never seen before, because I decided I'll show a slide really quickly, and then in a sculpture that some of you may know, Oh Charlie, Charlie, Charlie. It's a sculpture of an orgy where all the figures are me, and it's not. It seems like really sexual, but it isn't, because it's masturbation, and so you don't know what I'm thinking. It's really about a loneliness, and I saw a strange relationship between this and that. Like the boy is lost in himself in this moment of childhood. He's intensely in this world of the car, as in the orgy sculpture that I had made. You know, intensely, just, you know. Since I'm out of time, I'm going to go really fast. This, some of you may have seen. It's called Boy with Frog, and it was at Venice. Mr. Pino asked me to make it for the doggone, or not, he didn't ask me to make this, he asked me to make a sculpture. And one quick thing I'll say is scale is so important to a sculptor. And when we were trying to plan this work out, I went to Venice with a whole bunch of foam armatures, you know, kind of crude foam versions of it. And from life size to this size to much bigger. And we all agreed that the biggest one that I brought was the best. It was like, you know, I don't know, 18 feet high or something. And boy, and everyone said, "You got it, it's great." Mr. Pino was happy, everyone was happy, because you could see it from St. Mark's across the water. Boy, I thought, that's great. You know, you can see it from St. Mark's. It's fucking fantastic. And then I was flying out, and I started thinking, you know, I was going to go home and make it. I was like, well, you know, you can see it from St. Mark's at 18 feet. If I made it 50 feet, you could see it from the airport. And if I would make it like 500 feet, you could maybe see it from Milano. And then all that would do is give the boy a huge dip. I mean, what does that mean? You know, nothing, basically. You know? And so I had to rethink the whole thing, and with this worry that it would be that I was trying to get it smaller to cheat, you know, so I would have to pay less for materials or something. But Mr. Pino was very gracious and, you know, is very good with artists, and, you know, was very accommodating to this rethinking aspect. And we went back and made it just big enough to hold his ground in the location. And the armature of the sculpture, the voidness of it, isn't disintegrated by the size. Because I think what is the void is the trajectory in the gaze between the frog and the child. You can see that frog is hyper-realistic, the most realistic thing in the sculpture. Then the face is out of focus, as children are always, and kind of hard to find his soft gaze, his soft focus, what he's, you know, doing. Much articulation. You can't see it on the side, but one nipple is submerged into the chest because, you know, for many sculptural reasons is what I'm trying to say. And I won't go into it now, but politics removed him from the world, or from his location. And this is a show I had in Sweden, in Malmo, at the Museum years ago. And that was a piece I was talking about called Inkbox. That was Oh Charlie Charlie, ... this orgy where all the figures are me. And I was thinking recently about it and had to write something about it. And there is a very interesting scientific fact that all electrons in the whole universe have this absurd weight, something like, but just exact. Every single electron in the universe has the same strange mass weight to it. Nobody knows why. How could this be? You know, it's an absurdly specific number, and it doesn't vary by 1 zillion, billion, trillion, zillions of a microcron, whatever. You know, it's a mystery. And the famous American physicist John Wheeler, at that time, Richard Feynman was his graduate student at Princeton. And in the middle of the night, Wheeler calls up Feynman and goes, "Feynman, I know why all the electrons have the same weight." He says, "Why, Professor?" He says, "Because there's only one electron. And it's just zipping backwards and forwards in time, making a knot in space-time that gives an illusion that there's zillions and billions of them. And when it's going forward in time, it's an electron. When it's going backward in time, it's a positron." And Feynman said, "Yeah, but there's more electrons than positrons." And Wheeler said, "They're hidden in the protons or something." But I bring that up because this hinges on that question. Is there another out there? You know, or are we, you know, is your lover, you know, in Brancusi's A Kiss, it's a beautiful sculpture. It's one block of stone, looks like two, the figures are cut, but through the arm embrace you see it's one. So like two become one and kind of immovable. This is the other side of that coin of there is no other out there, that your other is a projection of yourself. And that was a big space in the museum. This is here, and I've run out of time, so I'll just go through it, and then people can ask me questions if they have time. These are solid stainless steel pieces machined rather than cast. This is also a thought experiment initially about a ghost. I walk in the Santa Monica Mountains every morning for health reasons in pre-dawn hours. And we have mountain lions about. And one thing they always tell you is when you need to tie your shoe, never bend over. You know, because the mountain lion comes, get you. You're not supposed to find a stump or a rock or something. Tie it that way. And one morning in the dark, when I was bent over tying my shoe in the mountains, I thought about the mountain lion. And then I thought, well, if a ghost needed to tie a shoe, he wouldn't need to have a shoe. And that was sort of the germ of the idea of the piece that it grew out of. And they have a very specific weight, or heavy, like a solidness to them. And what I'll leave you on is this was a show at Matthew Mark's 22nd Street space. And I was very happy with it. And each sculpture, of course, is an individual sculpture, but for the show, I wanted to create an experience that would ask three different things of each sculpture. So the viewer would be asked three different aspects of sculpture. The shoe tie, very Nicolaides, is very felt and understood through kinesthetics, body kinesthetics. You feel it in your body. The large homeless lady who's asleep is asleep as geology. She's unwakeable. She can't be stirred. And she's narrative aspect to understanding. She's like several thousand pounds. She's a lot. And the young man, which is upstairs, is a guy I know very well. And Jack writes about it very beautifully, I think, in the catalog. And so I leave most of that to Jack to talk about. But steel is an alloy of iron and nickel. And there's so little nickel in it. But the nickel that is in it forms like a web molecularly through the steel. And that's what gives it a kind of elasticity and doesn't crack. It really changes it, just this little bit of nickel. And I think Young Man is very abstract, and you approach it in an abstract way. And the reason is that it took me, that I used time to sculpt it. And the guy's name is Rye. So it's a figure, and as an alloy of a figure, it has a fine, fine web of rye running through it. So it's not a portrait, but I tried to, like the Kurils figure, why is he smiling? I tried to take what I understood and knew of rye out onto the surface and bring a kind of reality, human reality, to the steel. And I think for that reason, it allows itself to move into abstraction. And, but there I'll end my talk. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Charlie. A great, great talk. So much to think about. I'm also happy to see that the two other artists are in here. So much knowledge and so much practical knowledge about sculpture in one room. The real conversation, of course, happens in a way upstairs between the artists, but maybe there's one or two questions. We have I don't want to torture you. You gave so much already, but maybe there's someone who wants to ask something. Oh, yeah.
Charlie, I just want to say that was phenomenal. It was but it was really so great, so informative. You know, using the choro and relating, you know, your interests through that just as a base was just great, really phenomenal. It was great.
Most of you have seen the show. The real opening is tomorrow, but this really wants us all to go back and look more, I think. Thank you, Charlie. It's been fantastic.